Bonjour à tous.
Morning, everybody. Controversial. It's a new format, 30 minutes with a face-to-face with two people. And the idea of this controversy is that they don't necessarily agree. So the topic is, can we or do we want to change? So we'll have to set the limits, talk about practical elements, real life. I'm with Zach Achambois, who is the CEO of Valeo, started at Saint-Gobain, and now he's the president of the board of Orange, and Xavier Bertrand, the president of the Hauts-de-France region in France. So I asked them what they understood by this topic, so I like the idea that, they said, be careful before we talk about that. There are things that we shouldn't change. So first of all, I think the question is not well properly addressed. Do we want to change? Can we change? I think the question is, should we change? And the answer is yes. When you change, there are things that are positive. And when you look at what's taken place in the recent years, the way our country is perceived abroad has changed totally. For a number of reasons. First of all, the lowering of taxes, production taxes, unemployment, the unemployment rate. And there are other things that are happening. Is the Choose France program, which attracts the major companies of the different countries, and the French tech, very important elements. Whatever happens, we need to continue to lower taxes, lower production taxes, and ensure that employment, it's one of the most important topics probably, continues to grow. Do you agree, Xavier Bertrand, that the policy of the offer should be made sacred? We should continue in the same direction? Well, if it's the only thing to change, we're in it's bad news, I like Jacques a lot, and I'll just repeat what I said earlier, is how can someone who's managed to make so many changes at the head of Valeo, for 10 years he talked about the transformation, change, so that we would include more electricity in our products. And it was my big question, ambition. It's very innovative. He's very innovative in his job. He talked about his new role at the head of Orange. But when you talk about society, honestly, if we're just talking about the policy of offer, we're not at the level. We're not at the level. We're not meeting the challenge here. You're lacking ambitions. What's happened to you? First time I hear that I'm not ambitious. And so there are a lot of topics, controversial topics here, but I said that some things that we shouldn't change. But there's some things we need to change in depth, and I'll start with, and for someone who's very strongly involved in work in general, there are figures that were just left aside when there was the retirement reform. It's not 64 years old. It's much later that we should set the limit. I'll propose a few figures here. The number of hours worked by person per year is 630. It's the number of hours worked per inhabitant. Do we work more than the others? We have the lowest level of the OECD countries, 663 hours per year. France, 630, I'm sorry. Germany, 722. Europe, 744. OECD, 744. US, 826, and 843 for Switzerland. We can't distribute money, which is one of our major theme in France, if we don't work more, or if at least the 630 hours are brought up to the level of the OECD. It's a massive change. And I think we have to collectively find ways to increase the number of hours worked in a society where, unfortunately, work is not considered as a key value. And it's a topic, so, I blame politicians for that. So we have the lowest number of hours per inhabitant. So the idea is that we have the lowest number of hours. We have to work more. It doesn't mean to work on Sundays or put in question the 35 hours. I think the people have to work longer and younger. But he's blaming politicians, the fact that we work 630 hours. No, there's one major element in our society that took place in the 1990s, and that's the 35-hour work week. That was the beginning of the change. So we never worked at making work a capital ambition in our country. So we work less, and the discussions we had during the retirement reform discussions, there was a rupture between those who should work more to ensure the proper distribution of the wealth, and a lot of politicians who were against working more, considering that work is not a cardinal value. And so maybe we could be reminded of your position. I've always been in favor that we work longer, because otherwise it's simple. Either we lower pensions, retirement plans, or it's. But for a reform to be accepted, it has to be just. And it wasn't a just reform. That's what, and I wouldn't have voted it as such, per se. My position hasn't changed. I think it's one of the keys. I'd like to go back on, do we want to change? People on paper will say yes, but in reality it's not as simple as that. Can we change? Yes. How can we get people to understand that we have to head towards change? We have to understand what's happening, first of all. It's a case of a lot of Western societies. We're dancing on a volcano, in fact. We should see today that the rise of extremism is a barometer of all that. I think if there are to be changes in depth, it's in the relationship with authority, the relationship with work, and our relationship with our youth. And there's a method for that. It's a change in governance that will be turned towards the territories. I can develop this. There'll be questions, but we'll go back on the issue of labor and work. On the question of retirement, why do you say it's not just? Why do you say this reform was not just? All parametric reforms are the same. They are systemically not just. Who pays for this reform? Chiefly, the generations between 61 and 73, those who started to work very early and those who are affected by difficult jobs. And if we had decided to do 43 years of payment, then you wouldn't have been doing injustice. So the controversial is, no, wait a minute. No, we're not going to talk only on retirement plan, but the retirement reform. But Nicholas, you watch BFM TV? Yeah, I work at BFM. Okay. So in the evening, 2 days after the launching of the reform, the Minister of Labor went on BFM, and he was interviewed by French people. And there's an engineer who told him, who asked him, I started to work at 26, and with your reform, what does it change for me? And the ministry said, for you, don't worry, it doesn't change anything. For all those who were there before, what was it change? I'm for reform like the reform of retirement 2003. I think we have to modernize our systems, but if you don't have justice, French will not adhere to your proposals. I'll go back on work. Jacques is right. We need to accept that there be more work, that we work longer. But if you don't integrate the fact, not only for the youth, that there's a new relationship to work, a new redefinition of what the work value is all about, will not make any progress. And that's the problem. There's also wages, career perspectives, work conditions, and recognition in your work. And the problem we had with retirement, so here it's in the companies that things should change, and companies will have to face their responsibility. What you need to understand today is on all these issues, French people did not have the same result as in the US. A lot of employees do the minimum. And if we don't recreate a new relationship at work, we won't make any progress. So Jacques, in the end, it's the company, it's the employer that needs to change its way of thinking of work, the way of training the employees, and and sharing the added value. I think that wealth is created by enterprises and not the public authorities. That's where the wealth is created. So adhering to work, that's where it's created. I've had the opportunity to work in some companies like Orange, for example, where there's a remarkable adhesion of the collaborators with the enterprise, with technological mutations that are extraordinary. And after the distribution, the sharing is another topic. When I was a young civil servant long years ago, there were two elements that I thought were interesting. Is that we forgot there was a notion of the RMI, that is reconquering the internal market. And we said, let's not worry about the cost competitiveness. Our country is not competitive, but since we're smarter than the other countries, we'll have more sophisticated products. So these two notions killed us, which led to the point that industry represents 10% of our GDP, while it was over 20% like Germany 20 years ago. You can't survive if you're not competitive. We need to reconquer our competitiveness, and the work relation between enterprise and collaborators is key. If there's no adhesion of the workforce to the strategic vision of the enterprise, we make no progress. But on the other side, our enterprises have to be competitive, and we've lost part of our competitiveness in the last 20 years. So according to you, Jacques, recovering this lost competitiveness, will it come from political choices, public action? Yep, somehow, yes. Taxes, income tax is a public choice when you're a sovereign state, that is, and adding social charges. You know that the hour worked with all the social charges for an enterprise is at the same level as in Germany. But what is in the pocket of the worker is much lower than what you have in other countries. So we have a problem of competitiveness. At the same time, in public services, you don't get your money's worth. Education doesn't work as it should. The hospitals don't work as it should. Health care. I think it's a scandal to have a passport, for example, and you have to wait months, whereas in a lot of countries it's all digital, so you have social charges, taxes that are the highest in OECD countries. At the same time, if you're aware, you have a public service that doesn't give you your money's worth. Xavier Bertrand, okay, well, taxes, the efficiency of the public authorities, public choices. So the first problem, in my opinion, is that the middle class is choking, because everything that is up to the social elevator, starting with school, work, all this is become practically impossible. There's a political responsibility for public services, but there's also a responsibility in enterprises, and I think we all have it's all hands on deck. Otherwise, there will be a political reaction. So where do you position that responsibility for enterprises? Training. The training, now we adapt the competencies to the needs of the enterprise. So we take into account the aspirations of the enterprises, even within an enterprise. So that's what's at stake. You have to understand that today everybody ending its activity. In a career, you will change 10 times functions. So what's at stake is you have to ensure the loyalty of your employees. So it's a bit helped by political choices, but take remote work, for example. Companies have to be careful. All functions cannot be transferred to remote working. And so for those functions where you can't work remotely, it's going to be a problem. So the political instances have to raise the awareness. Otherwise, we will create a fracture. So I think that the pivotal question for the years to come is beyond the authority. is the question of work on the sides of enterprises and employees, and the issue of youth. People in France want to live in safety, prepare the future of their children. And there's the failure of initial training, education. That's a problem. We can't continue to spend as much money as the Germans do with fewer students and the results that we have with 1.5 million NIDS. You know, something's going to happen. You know, you can't have schools that are managed by trade unions. So the reform of apprenticeship, for example, in my region, I supported this region, and there was a reform in the professional high schools, vocational high schools. It will be costly. I will have to change the organization. We'll have to correspond to offer training programs that correspond to the needs of enterprises. But the social charges, you know, the difference between what the employee nets in their pockets is very different. So yeah, it's a French choice. We made a collective choice, and we pay for it. It's after war. That was a decision that dates back to after the war. No, we have to lower public expenditures. Today, they're only the local authorities that can do that. The state, national state, is not capable of doing this. The state expenditure is about the same as the countries of OECD. I'm at the head of a region that was the poorest. I've reduced the expenditures. The municipalities reduce their expenditures, and the state doesn't. The national state, that's the key. That's where the key is. That when you say there are too many social charges, the social charges finance things. I'll tell you one thing, Nicolas. You'll have a new distribution to do for the tax system. Any politician saying that says that they will lower taxes in the coming years, it's Pinocchio. He's a liar. But someone who says, if I'm elected, I will lower taxes, this person is dangerous. Liar and dangerous. In 2024, we will lower fiscal expenditures, so we will cancel some niches. And so are you convinced by this proposal? So there are two elements in this question. There's a co-responsibility between the state and enterprises. Enterprises have a major role in vocational training, a major role in suburbs, on the territories, over the territories, and without enterprises, nothing will happen. That's obvious. On the other hand, you have to ensure the competitiveness of enterprises and understand the insoluble. You know, you can't lower taxes without lowering state expenditures, and the public authorities must modernize their actions. We talked about not getting our money's worth for public services. We have to reduce resources, so it's an equation that's insolvable, very difficult to solve. But it involves true management. We run the impression when you're in an enterprise that enterprises have modernized their activities. They've lowered their overhead costs. So all the supporting services, they've lowered their overhead costs in the past years, and this lowering of the overhead costs has not been done in the public sector. So the public sector must spend less and levy less taxes.
Absolutely.
So today we need to focus on priorities. So public policies, public services, there are three priorities that are pivotal. Let's have a look at those priorities: health, education, housing. I was mentioning public policies. Regarding housing, people have said that it's a time bomb. What does it mean in terms of jobs, value creation, and above all, you have millions of French people who want to be able to have housing. If you don't have the right accommodation housing, the demographic situation will deteriorate. You have an apartment, a home, you have 2 children in the same room. If you cannot move to another flat, if you have 3 children in a room, it's a dormitory. So what is important is to anticipate. This is the watchword. This is what companies should do, and public policies alike. There was a report that was published. We need to fund the ecological transformation of companies. You need to consider taxes, and people don't agree with taxes when they are too high. So it's a matter of responsibility. So in the years to come, we need to take stock of the situation. It's a national, political, and entrepreneurship-oriented approach. Who should pay? So you mentioned the Pisani report. So 65 billion euros every year, and 35 billion euros in terms of financing the ecological transition. Who should pay? Debt level growth with the growth in jobs, or private savings geared towards ecology? What do you think? I can't understand the policies of central banks. They are told that the inflation level should be the same as before 2019, but we are dealing with 2 major transformations: digital transformation and combating global warming. When you produce an electron with gas and oil, and when you produce with photovoltaic, it is expensive. When you use electric concrete, it is more expensive. So the production costs are higher. So inflation will continue to rise. If you want to finance all of these transitions, it's a matter of price. I'm not an economist. I'm a poor entrepreneur, so to speak. So there are some transitions, and I think that the level inflation will be higher. It might be 3%. I think that Christine Lagarde has left. I don't know if Villeroy de Gallo will be with us. In 2024, the inflation rate should be 2%. I don't think that it is the case. Then you have to take into account the international dimension. Regarding resources, we need to use international drivers. We can't fend for ourselves. We need to be at the forefront of this fight. We don't have much time left. Can we change? Yes. Do we want to change? Yes. We need to be aware of the challenges ahead of us. There's an intergenerational responsibility. You cannot change things overnight with a magic wand, but I think that we can take up the challenges of tomorrow if we can take on board society as a whole. So I think that we can change the inflation target of the central bank to move from 2% to 3% in terms of inflation rate. Oh, we have 1 minute more, by the way. So just a word about public spending. So 1 point for housing, 4 points for pensions, 1 point of economic. We have 8 points worth of GDP. So you've talked about that, given your ambitions. How do you go about that? So less transfer-related spending and more investments in public services, even though the public services are not managed by public agents. Less redistribution, yes, we need to focus on work. The unemployment insurance policies are not geared towards training or return to employment. It's a sea change, but you could make lots of saving, especially for households. So thanks a lot for this controversy between Jean Archambault and Xavier Bertrand. So it's a matter of co-responsibility between state and companies. Thanks a lot.